Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, and perhaps even good evening. Thank you so much for dropping by and joining me for another exciting Daz Pro Artist stream, in which we're going to talk about how to convert clothing from Genesis 8 to Genesis 9, and also, hopefully, from Genesis 9 to Genesis 8. It is wonderful to see you. Happy Pride Month. Mr. Brian is here, aka Zero Calvin. There's the Dragonade, and there's Julia. Those are my moderators. Thank you so much for doing this with me. Jeff is here all the way from France. Miss Biscuits is here also from Europe, from the Netherlands. Night Tech, there's X201, Wim van der Missen. I'm so sorry that you're going through Windows update hell. That is just crazy stuff. I know exactly what that feels like, and if you have multiple workstations, it feels like it never stops. It's crazy. Web Soul is here. There's also the Go Miner, Mix C, and Map. We're going to call you Map. It doesn't matter if the YouTube name change hasn't quite happened. If there's anyone else I've missed to shout out, I do apologize. Trevor Hancock, for example. Good to see you. Good to see you. So yes, it's been an exciting thing, and converting clothing is one of those things that I think many of us who were involved in the Genesis 9 launch had to do, because there was just not a lot of clothing around for Genesis 9, and we had to just go ahead and do that. So today I want to show you some of the approaches that you can take to make that happen in both ways, and I have a super tiny, super exciting little presentation here that we can watch. It's only 5 slides, so it's nothing amazing. And the font looked much better when we prepared this early on a different computer, but it's one of those things. It says what it is on the tin. Converting clothing from Genesis 8 to Genesis 9 and vice versa. So here are the options that you have at your disposal. Number one is don't convert the clothing at all. And this is a point that I really want to stress, that, don't feel obliged to do it. There are often creative decisions that you can take that allow you to take a different path, and this is so true not just for clothing conversions between Genesis figures, but for anything in the 3D realm that's been made for something other than it was intended to be. So a good example is use a Daz asset in a different application like Blender or Unreal Engine. Yes, you can do it, but it'll be quite a bit of work to make that happen. And what I'm trying to tell you is try to make that decision early on and see if it's worth your while. Yes, of course, there's always going to be ways that you can make this happen, but is it a timely investment on your part? So think very carefully about that. If you have a Genesis 8 jacket and you want to use it in a scene, consider using a Genesis 8 character. If you have a Genesis 9 character that must wear that jacket, consider converting the character and then have the Genesis 8 version of that character wear the jacket, or replace the character. Does it have to be exactly that character? That's an important decision to make. So same with Genesis 9. If you have clothing items that Genesis 9 can wear and you need it on Genesis 8, there's ways to cross do that, but it always involves a lot of work, and we're going to go through how you can do this, but consider very carefully, is this worth your while? Then number 2, you can use AutoFit inside of Daz Studio. So that's a really exciting mechanism that Daz Studio has had for a while, in which it goes and looks at the source clothing item, it looks at the target figure, and it tries to do its best to infer the weight maps from the figure onto the clothing, and it basically re-rigs it from scratch. But it doesn't do anything else, and it doesn't always do a good job. Sometimes it does, but sometimes it does not. But since it's free and it doesn't cost you anything, you can just go and run it and see, is it kind of where I need my clothing item to be or not? So hair and shoes don't really fall into this category because they're really difficult to deal with, and that involves option 4 that we're going to talk about in a second. So then option 3 is that you can use something similar to AutoFit, which is the Sickle Yield Riversoft clothing converter. These guys have been around for a while, the converters as well as the vendors, and they've been made for several generations, and I think the latest one that came out is the one that converts Genesis 8 to 9 clothing. And that works sometimes better than AutoFit, but it's also not perfect, and the creators do tell you this in the README and I think on the sales page as well. And it's because there are limitations of what Daz Studio can do to infer the new rigging, especially when the figures are so different. Like Genesis 8 and 9 are very, very different. Oh, you've just installed it. Excellent, Map. Good stuff. We'll have a quick look at how that works. It's a beautiful tool, and it has some benefits. All these things have pros and cons. So yeah, it's not perfect. Sometimes it works really well, sometimes it doesn't, and it's just, you know, the nature of things inside Daz Studio. So as an example, between Genesis 3 and Genesis 8, that tool worked really well because the figure shape and the figure rigging and the weight maps were very, very similar between the two figures. There was mainly just the A to the T-pose. That was the major change. But everything else pretty much stayed the same. But between Genesis 8 and 9, there's magnitude of differences, and that's why that's not all that possible. So then option number 4, which we're going to spend a lot of time with, is the manual conversion. So this is a little bit like what we talked about in our previous stream, in which we talked about rigging clothing from scratch. This is a little bit like that. So if you've watched that episode, then you already know a few of the tricks that are coming, but I didn't get a chance to show you all the bits and pieces, especially the free solutions that feature, you know, good old-fashioned Hexagon that we can use to smooth out some of the crinkly, wrinkly bits that we're going to get. So I'm going to show you how to do that, not because Hexagon is so up-to-date and fashionable, but because it's free and it works and it's really well integrated with Daz Studio. And there's some other tips and tricks I wanted to show you. So essentially, manual conversion is like you bring the item that you want to convert into the target shape, and there's several tricks that we can use to make that happen. And then you export it out as an OBJ, essentially, in principle, re-import it and then re-rig it with the transfer utility. And then some of the hard labor comes into play, and that's you know what you're going to have to invest. And this is where I'm strongly coming back to point number 1. This is going to take a lot of time, and while it's possible, and while this is a good method for vendors to do this, it requires tools, it requires knowledge, and most importantly, it requires time that sometimes we don't have. So it is because of those reasons, and also you might not be super happy with the results. So you might find yourself, hey, I've invested 4 hours on trying to convert this item of clothing. It's still not perfect. You could have invested that on, you know, the project you're working on. It's one of those things I wanted to really drive home. So if you can avoid it, don't convert at all. And that is it. So let's go and have a quick nosy at how all these various options look inside of Daz Studio. Oh yes, Brian just posted a couple of links here. That is very good. This is the RSSY clothing converter. We're going to have a look at that. It is pretty much a one-click tool, and it gets better results than the AutoFit utility, but it's not exactly perfect. Shame's on sale, one of those things. And then the other tool that we're going to need to iron out the things that aren't perfect is Hexagon. Hexagon actually comes in 2 versions. It's probably already part of your install manager. If you haven't installed it, then I would strongly recommend you give it a go. There is a beta version that you have to kind of buy. It's free, but you have to click the checkout button on the Daz website, and that is the beta version that supports 64-bit. The regular version only supports 32-bit, and that is sometimes it's just prone to more crashes because it doesn't use up the vast amounts of memory that you have on your computer. You practice the don't convert at all idea all the time. That is, that's I think that is partly what is so important about dealing with 3D. I think that is just so important. Sometimes to just understand, hey, I understand this is not what I'm intended to do with it, so I can run into issues. Like, I'm a fair believer of something that if it's made for Daz Studio, you can use it in Daz Studio and it'll look great. You try to use the same thing in Blender and it's not going to look great, and it's because it's not made for that. And I think if we follow that rule, we're going to be okay. So the process of bringing something from 8 to 9 is slightly different than bringing it from 9 to 8. So let's stick with the 8 to 9 process first, and then we'll talk about how to bring Genesis 9 items back to 8, because we can use these amazing developer tools that we have with Genesis 9. So first of all, I'm going to go and I'll show you this on the base wardrobe items, because we all have them in our library. If you head over to the smart content here and you click on figures and you search for starter or start, something like that, then you can see the Genesis 8 and 9 starter essentials here. And so we're going to use a shirt from Genesis 8 here under wardrobe. Let's use this one here, the basic wear tank top, and let's see if we can bring that onto Genesis 9. So for that we need to go and load, in fact, Genesis 9 first. Let's go and do that. Either of these will be fine. So once again, it's the starter essentials under figures. I'm going to use a dev load that comes with no eye, so it's a little bit easier. Any of these conversions, make sure you use the base figure. Don't use a custom character for that. Anything that has a morph dialed in that deviates from the base figure, don't use it, because that can interfere with the conversion process. So once we've decided we do want to convert something, we go and try auto fit first. So if I go, and that usually comes up automatically with the figure selected, with your target figure selected, head over to wardrobe and then go and pick the item you want to convert. So double click that, and then auto fit recognizes, hey, this isn't made for this figure. What do you want me to do with that? So you head over here and don't choose unsupported. I mean, we can do that, but if we just leave the default, that doesn't fit, does it? So let's go do that again, because yeah, it needs to at least know what was the source figure. So with the figure selected, double click. If that isn't selected, the auto fit isn't, the dialog doesn't come up. Here it is. So we go and tell it, hey, this was made for Genesis 8 female. That it needs to know. And then the type, you can leave that on none, but it's a projection template. So if you find something that is more suited to what this clothing item was, you can use it. So it's essentially, on Genesis 9, we can visualize these things, but it's essentially a secondary shape against which this clothing item kind of collides and then gets smoothed again. If we say none, it'll just use this figure here. And if we use something like a loose template, it's a little bit away from the figure, and it doesn't have all the kinks, like, you know, the creases and stuff. I might just use the body suit tight template here. And I'm sure you've tried this many times. It does kind of work. It takes a moment, but keep it simple, stupid. That's exactly right. Yes, keep it simple, silly. And this is what it comes up with. And you know, I mean, technically it fits, but we do see some issues that we need to take care of. So it does actually fit the figure. That's kind of the good news. If we go and dial something up here in my Genesis 9 figure, maybe under people, I'll use something feminine. I could try the base feminine figure. It kind of follows along, but that ugly crease here, that is, you know, that's cause for concern, and that doesn't look great. And the more pronounced a figure you have, the more issues we have. So it's not just the crease, it's also some distortions here. And I see this so many times in renders, and there is, the only way to really take care of this is to manually even this out. And we've looked at how to do this in the last stream, but I'm going to touch on this today and show you some other tools of of how we can do that. So this is kind of a mixture between the weight maps that can be smoothed out, as well as the full body morph, or the morph that you dial in that doesn't exist in the clothing item, and it kind of, it doesn't look great. But it is something that you can try, and some clothing items behave better than others. So like, short pants type things, they might look better. Mrs. Swole, how does that work? Yeah, okay. Ripped, baby, ripped. Good stuff. But it does follow, so I think that's the takeaway, that these types of things, little pokes through here, we can use ideally something like ZBrush to just bring that out, or Hexagon, that's possible. Or if you have more expensive tools, you can use things like Marvelous Designer to redrape that. But imagine we don't have that. Let's try to use the free tools for that. So that's auto fit, and we're gonna look at fixing this in a moment. Let me go take this away and try the same thing with the clothing converter that I think I have installed. Have I? Let me just let me see if I've actually installed it. I think so. It's under Utilities, clear this out. Yeah, there we go. The RSSY clothing converter. Let's see what that tool does. So to use it, you need ideally, and I would strongly recommend this, you need an empty directory that serves as your target library, or Mesh Grabber. Trevor, that's also a possibility. Mesh Grabber is a good idea. Mesh Grabber, if you're familiar with that, that's a nice product that can give you, that can help you out grabbing things out of the figure. So ideally an empty content directory, and I'm going to put one on my desktop for now, and I'm going to call it converted clothing. And you can put it anywhere you like. In network drive is fine. That's basically where the clothing converter is going to save your converted clothing items into. So to map that here, right click on the content library, map that under Daz Studio formats, just right click on here and add a base directory, and then on the desktop or wherever it is you find it, converted clothing, select that folder. Now we have a new empty content library here. And to use the tool, you have to have a Genesis 9 figure loaded, and I don't think you need it selected, but it needs to be loaded. If it's not loaded, it'll prompt you to do that. And then we have the Genesis 8 female and the Genesis 8 male conversion script here. So those are both in there. There's also documentation. If you want to read that, there's a nice PDF that shows you how to work with this. But essentially, so I'm going to use a female item. So I'm going to go and double click it, and it goes, please select the Genesis 9 figure. So there we go. It doesn't have to just be loaded. It needs to be selected. There we go. Computer not happy. There we go. So that dialog comes up, and it wants us to set the output directory. That's the one that we've just made. So I'm going to go and click that and pick the directory on my desktop, converted clothing. And it'll make subdirectories for every piece of clothing that it's converted there. Then under add clothing, this is where we're going to have to pick each and every single file with clothing that gets added to this list here, and then it goes and does the conversion. So I'm going to stick with the same one that I've just used with AutoFit. So I'll add files here, and first I need to find where that is. So I think mine is under public documents. So the full path is users. That's the default location on your C drive under users, public documents, and there's my Daz 3D library. And in here, I think that's where that installed, but that's where it's installed. Under people, we have Genesis, I think it's 8. Is it? No, it's not. It's probably 8 female. And then we have clothing, I think. And here we have, I thought we did have basic wear. Maybe we don't. Let me just see where that is. I thought it was there. Oh no, actually it probably is because my base figures are installed in a different directory. Let me just see where that is. Well prepared, Jay. On my other system, this is all in the default location, and on this one, it's in a different location. So this is the tank top I wanted to use. So if I go and use the info button here, it's in users public documents starter base figures. That's where that is. Gotcha. Now I know. Good stuff. Good stuff. Let's go right back there. Output directory, did you remember? No, totally didn't remember. It does remember as soon as you do something. I think it does remember then. Let's add file. So we're almost... Was it in Starter Essentials? Base figures, that's it, isn't it? Yes. That's where I was. Perfect. I think that's where I was. And in there it was people. Gotcha. Genesis 8. No, it was just 8. No. Where was it then? Sure was in here? Clothing. Yes, clothing. Basic wear. I've got it. Finally. Finally. So you have to select every single... Congrats, really. You have to select every single DAF file if you want to convert all these things. I think mine was just the sports bra or the tank top. So I'm just going to go and select these two here. Hit open, and then they appear in the list. And then you hit execute, and that'll go and convert anything that's ticked in the list and put it in there. It's very convenient. You've got a log option here that'll tell you what's gone right and what's gone wrong. You've got a list of conformers, the stuff that it conforms, it converts. And you've got some options here, but I'm going to leave them all on the default. Hit execute and see what happens. So you see it loads its own fitting figures into the scene, and then eventually gives me back my Genesis 9 figure, and sort of a converted version keeps appearing there. I can go and just cancel out of this. It'll remember this. And now if I go over to my content library, into my new directory here, I have Basicware as a new product, so it converts the icons as well, which is kind of nice. And I can go and load these things without the auto-fit dialog triggering. So Basicware top, if I go and load that, I see this result. So it's done a slightly different job than AutoFit, but it also didn't get it absolutely right. And that is what the creators say in the document as well. It's quite funny because on my other system, the conversion looked different. It also wasn't right, but it was not right differently. So one of those things. X201, that is a good tip. That is indeed a very good tip. That is a good tip. Thank you. I appreciate that. So again, we need to do some work here, but we're kind of halfway there that we have icons. It's also apparently, I haven't tested this, it's also apparently smart content aware, this tool, so that's nice. So in order to fix this manually, then that's basically point 4. Your first order of business would be to select the Basicware, well, your tank top here, your item of clothing, and head over to the node weight brush tool and check the weight maps. And that, with that icon selected here, so that's under, this is a little, it took me a while to understand, but it's under tools, the node weight brush tool. If you head over to tool settings, so that's another tab that you need, you can go and click on every single joint that you have here. Start with the hip and select general weights, and then just go and open each of these bones up. And I suppose this is kind of in the spine region here. So click the spine, and this means there is a weight map here. This here means there's no weight map applied. We don't see any values. Gray means there's no values. But if I just look at the spine, this is not where the problem area is. It's probably kind of starting to be here, or also probably then on spine 3. And this is where we see kind of a relatively harsh transition between the blue and the red. Blue means a little bit of influence, red means there's a lot of influence. And if you switch over from the paintbrush here to the smoothing brush, the little S brush here, you can go and left click and drag over this gradient and see if that smooths it out. So that might not happen. That might also not be enough. I might make the outer radius maybe 60 here. Make my brush a little larger, make that 20. And then you can try, sometimes that is all you need to smooth these things out. There is a symmetry option. I'm not using it, but also it doesn't make all that much of a difference. So this is something we need to go and take an external application and smooth that out, and then essentially go and save that. I think it got a little bit better, but it's also, you know, it's not fantastic. I'll show you a couple of ways to get rid of that. So if this isn't fixing your problem, and 90% chance it won't completely get rid of the issue, you can switch back to your universal manipulator here, universal selection tool, and then you can do one of two things. So the first one doesn't involve any external tools, and that is just using the smoothing modifier and doing that in a very creative way. And you know, this is something that you can try out on other items of clothing. If you're not quite familiar with the smoothing modifier, it's hiding on the parameters tab on the item of clothing over here under mesh smoothing. So clothing selected, on the parameters tab under the item of clothing, there's mesh smoothing. Not every item of clothing has that. So especially if you make stuff yourself, some clothing that you buy from the store, that sometimes it's just not necessary and it's just not there. So first of all, it has an enable disable option here, so you can enable and disable that, and then it gets applied essentially. But if the mesh smoothing option isn't even here, you can head over to edit, object or figure, doesn't matter, either of them is fine, geometry, and then there is add smoothing modifier. So that will apply this thing onto your selected item. You can apply that to anything. You can apply that to seat and sit a figure down and make an indent. Essentially, it goes and is a collision detection modifier inside Daz Studio, and it'll go and look at a target figure. So in this case, it's the Genesis figure, but it could be set to something else. And it says, hey, the clothing item, need to collide with this. So I mustn't cause any poke through. If I happen to be intersecting with that geometry, I got to make sure I'm outside of it. That's what it does. That's what it's designed to do. So this is something that's important to understand, because sometimes you have multi-layered clothing. You may have this shirt here, but then you may have a jacket on top of that. And if the jacket had a smoothing modifier that would be set to collide with the Genesis figure, then there'll be poke through. The shirt underneath it might be poking through. So at that point, you can say, well, instead of colliding with the figure directly, please collide with the undershirt and then be outside of that. And then, you know, you can stack your multi-layered clothing and let the smoothing modifier take care of figuring this out. In this case, we only have figure and item, so that's kind of cool. It hasn't helped us a lot yet, but if we go and crank up the smoothing iterations, it might do that. This is going to take a little bit of time. So if I go and set this to 10, you'll see just a tiny bit of a change happening here. If I set this to something longer, like 50, you'll see that at the bottom right, this orange strip here, let me go and set this to something even higher, like 100. You see that the strip is kind of calculating, and that's the time it takes for it to, you know, iterate that many times through the collision process, and eventually might come up with smoother results. In this case, it looks like it hasn't, which is a shame. But sometimes it can create really, really cool results. And you can, rather than having to make this calculation every time, you can update the figure's base shape by re-importing it and then setting that as a base shape. Let me go back to the version we had that AutoFit did, because I can better demonstrate what I'm going to show you now. Let's go back to my starter essentials here under wardrobe and go and fit this with AutoFit Genesis 8 female. I'm going to go and say tight template. Let's say loose template. See what the loose template does. Let it calculate. There we go. Now we've got this sharp kink here again. So if I go back here on the parameters tab, it has a smoothing modifier on there, but it's disabled. So let me go and enable that and put the smoothing iterations to 50 right off the bat. Let me see what happens. It's not bad. See, without and with. The thing is just, it took like, you know, 10-15 seconds to calculate this. So that's actually done a decent job to get rid of these issues, but the calculation is a little bit annoying. So what you can do is export this geometry out and then update its base geometry. Let me do that. So if I go with the clothing item selected here, file, export, and then I'll go and maybe go into our converted clothing folder here, and I'll make a new folder called OBJs. In here, I'm going to call this one basic shirt smoothed, perhaps. And here I'll go and select my Daz Studio preset to just make sure it's the same scale on the import than it is on the export. And then over here under filter objects, very important, set this to selected roots. So enable this and set it to selected roots. That way only the shirt gets exported and nothing else, no figures, no anything else. Then we say accept. And that is almost that. I may have got this in high resolution. Shouldn't have done that, shouldn't have done that. Set this to base resolution first. Let it recalculate the smoothing modifier. And make sure this is at base resolution before you import it, because we only PAs can export high resolution and then import it again as a morph. So let's go to do this again. Export basic shirt smoothed. Filter object is selected. 100% scale is selected. Let's export this. Takes a moment. Okay, good stuff. Now I'll go back to my smoothing modifier. I can also switch the high resolution back on here. That's cool. On my mesh smoothing, I'm going to go and disable this. In fact, I'm going to go and set this back to its default and disable this. So we got the kink back. So now here comes the fun part. We head over with the shirt selected, edit, and we head over to Object, Morph Loader Pro. Check it out. And here we're going to go and import this, also add Daz Studio Scale. And we'll check the morph that we want to import, which is on my desktop under Converted Clothing under OBJs, basic short smoothed shirt it was supposed to be called. And we say OK. And now we head over here and we say morph subdivision, no. Controller property, no. Reverse deformations, I would say yes. Override existing, actually, what am I talking about? Forget we're doing that. Forget it. Don't do that. Don't do that. What you're going to do is head over to Edit, I'm so sorry, Object, Geometry, and then at the very bottom of this dialog, there's an option that says Update Base Geometry. That is what I wanted to show you. That's the cool thing. You head over to that, and then you pick a file. So update full geometry from file. Then you browse to the file. I'm so sorry. I was going to show you how to import a morph. That's not what we want to do. Then we go hit OK and hit accept. And now this import dialog comes up that tells us, hey, what scale is this thing? So we're going to go and say Daz Studio Scale. And we don't have to worry about reversing deformations or all that because it's not a morph. We're literally replacing the object that we have as a shirt object right now. And hit OK, hit accept, and then we've got this. And that is now the new base morph. It has kind of changed the material now, so we need to just go and reapply that. And if you didn't have a base material, you just have to go and save it out before you do this. I can't honestly tell you why it does this, but under materials here, wardrobe. Do we have iRay? We don't have iRay. This is all RSL. I don't really know why. Yeah, perfect. Now it's back. But it's without kinks, so that is kind of the magic thing. I'll show you this again later, but this is, this is good. This is good news because we've just fixed an item of clothing with Daz Studio and no other tools, and we didn't really have to understand and know all that much. All we need to know, smoothing modifier, crank it up a little bit. Also different smoothing mechanisms. There's base shape matching and generic. So you can try either of these out and increase the smoothing iterations and see if you get a good result at one point. And when you're happy, go export the item of clothing as OBJ. And then with the item of clothing selected, disable mesh smoothing, head over to Edit, Object, Geometry, and then at the very bottom, update base geometry and import your file, and that replaces the vertex positions, which is very cool. X201, good question. Is the smoothing hierarchical? Does top item avoid underclothing and G9? Haha, very good question. No, it does not. It can only collide with a single item. So if you had multiple items, then that isn't going to work quite so easily by default. So you may have to, if this is kind of your main weapon of attack, you may have to consider using a proxy object that you can collide against. So as an example, it's a very good question, Trevor. Say I had a jacket and I have this part of the back that is causing problems. If I tell it to collide with the shirt, it might still cause poke through on the figure because it's no longer colliding with the figure and the shirt here doesn't exist. Likewise, if I say collide with the figure, it might still poke through with the shirt because there's a shirt in the way. So even though it's colliding correctly with the shirt, it doesn't do that. So two things to fix this. One option, and just while we're talking about this, this is another one of those secret weapons directly built into Daz Studio, is that you could use that hypothetical clothing item that this figure isn't wearing right now. You can apply something called a push modifier. And again, it's one of those things you can try to make it work. It might work, it might not. But essentially where it is under Edit, Object, Geometry, same location, and then there is Add Push Modifier. So it's a very powerful little menu, and it adds basically an expansion morph or an expansion dial to your clothing item. So if you select that, you can call it Push Modifier or you can call it Expand All, for example. Then you see what it does, and it kind of depends. On the edges, it might not look great, but it's one of those things. Sometimes it works well. It's under mesh offset, and the default is set to 1. So 0 is this, and you can go and increase that just in small increments, and that may also just avoid poke through. So this is something you can do, and you can leave that modifier on the figure. It adds kind of thickness. Sometimes it works better than other times. So it's something to play around with. You see what happens on the edges. So that's not often the desired effect that you want, but it is something that can come in handy in certain situations that avoids poke through. It's not greatly elegant, but you know, it can work. It's like a poor man's Expand All. I wish this would be a little bit wider, this clothing item. You can use it. The other option that you have, and specific to your question, you could use a proxy object to collide against. So imagine our jacket it's an either or thing, and I don't want either because neither gives me a good result. You can go and export Genesis with the shirt out as an OBJ, even a high resolution, it's totally fine. Then you bring it back in as an OBJ and let your next item collide against that object, and then you make that invisible because that's homogeneous geometry, so to say, and you can set it to that. Let me show you what I mean. So with the whole thing, I'll go and say export figure with shirt, just as an example here, as an OBJ. So this time make sure this is deselected. Filter objects must be deselected. So you want to export everything out like so. And then you import it straight back in. So import figure with shirt. This is going to be a little bit large. This is also Daz Studio scale. Import that. And it's going to look a little bit weird because we have essentially two figures in our scene. But look what the second figure looks like. It's essentially the same one, but it's one piece of geometry. So there's no rigging in there, no nothing. But it is now something that you can set invisible and then let your hypothetical jacket collide with that. So if you had, I don't think we have, do I have a jacket? I don't have it in basic wear. So let me just go and load this shirt here. It's going to look a little weird because it'll be auto-fitted from Genesis 8 male. I'll just go and put this on here. There we go. This is a great example. The shoulders look okay, but the shirt kind of still pokes through. But we're okay with that because we can say, hey, the basic t-shirt, let's head over here to mesh smoothing and enable that. And this is that either or situation. I don't really want it to collide with Genesis 9 or with the shirt. I want it to collide with figure and shirt. And we can go and do that. And in a moment, hopefully there, every item of poke through is gone. And then of course, yeah, that figure is disabled. Hello, Daz Studio, you're with us. I can't make it visible again. Oh, there we go. There, that's visible. We want to make it invisible. Hello, there, perfect. So then if you have smallish items of pokes through here, you can just go and increase the iterations, or use a different smoothing matching here. Try generic. Try increasing things to 20. There we go. It's gone away. So that's a way that you can. There's still a little bit here, so maybe base shape matching is better. You can also try collision iterations. Yeah, it's almost gone there. But that's something you could do, Trevor. And yeah, proxy object. I sometimes use that when I make indentations into objects. As long as the object has enough geometry and you want the figure to kind of make an indent on a mattress or something, you can go and again, you have the same thing. You have a figure and you have an item of clothing, and you think, yeah, that's difficult. Which one is going to collide? If it's like half the legs and half the skirt or something, you can just turn this into a proxy figure and then let the proxy figure make the indentation. So that's a possibility. Forgotten lectures. How you doing, buddy? A geoshell gold miner, that's not gonna really work. That will just create an extra material outside the figure. You can do that, but it's not going to avoid a poke through as such. You're welcome, X201, no worries. Oops, sorry. So it was X201 was the question, not Trevor. Sorry about that. In my mind, you're all the same. Not true. Sorry about that. That's good to know. That's good. Hey, Mr. Chris is here. How's it going, buddy? Good to see you all. So that are the secrets of the smoothing modifier. We've just discussed, just for those of you who joined us a little bit late, we've been able to get rid of the auto-fitted indentations here just with the smoothing modifier, thanks to this tool here. Then we've exported that shirt and updated the base geometry so that this calculation doesn't have to happen every time you apply the item of clothing. And that happens just as a refresher under Edit, Object, Geometry, Update Base Geometry. That is how you can import that. And maybe we'll use that later again. But yeah, super exciting tip. So if this didn't get us the results we want, let me go back to the version that the clothing converter did for us, the sickle yield clothing converter, sickle yield Riversoft clothing converter. Let me go and open that, or maybe this one here. So we haven't checked how this looked. Yeah, this is an interesting example. So this is kind of almost there, and it certainly is better than the result we got from AutoFit, but it's still not quite there. So there's a couple of things that we can do to make this look better, and I want to show you how to do this in Hexagon. And this is something you can use not just on the base figure and the base position, you can use this also with post figures and custom characters. If you have those and there's a bit of poke through that you wish you wanted to smooth out, or something like these ugly crinkles underneath it that you can smooth out. This bottom bit here, that's difficult to get right. So on the original figure that was straight, so this wasn't greatly converted. Let me just see what AutoFit would make of this. As an example, this one here. AutoFit says, we'll say none just to see what happens. Yeah, AutoFit at least leaves it fairly straight, but it still has these ugly crinkles here. So before we do that, one thing to check, is this actually fixable, is switch it over to the wire texture shaded and have a look at the little geometric lines here. So it looks like the geometry isn't particularly broken here, but if you see something like that, then that's a good indication of, hey, if something's too crinkled up and you can't fix it, don't fix it. If it looks like broken geometry, don't do it. In this case, it doesn't do that. It just needs a little bit of smoothing out. And Hexagon, being the free app that it is, can help you there. Marvelous Designer can help you, ZBrush can help you, Blender can help you, but those are either expensive or intimidating, or both. And Hexagon is easy and it's free. So let's see what that can do. I have it hooked up correctly already, and I can just go over to File, Send to Hexagon, like I could to ZBrush, but let me go Hexagon, and then I'll show you some configuration bits and pieces there as well. Thanks, Brian, for putting that out there. Right, Biscuits? It's a good idea. I think so too, and it's just one of those tricks of the trade. Once you know, it's all good. How you doing, by the way? You okay? You keeping good? We should chat on email more. I've been so busy lately. It's been quite difficult. We should hook up. We should catch up. So here it is, Hexagon. And again, it can look a little old, outdated, intimidating, and I'll talk you through some of the navigational things in a moment. But just to see how we can fix this, it looks almost better in here. From an angle, I can still see there's some issues here. So first thing we need to do is we need to select the clothing item. That's here on the bottom right. You can either select the figure or the clothing item. This means it's object selection. And this then goes essentially into edit mode for faces, edges, and points. And one of those tools that Hexagon has that I can't rave too much about is that it's a vertex editing tool, but it also has fairly primitive but very powerful brush tools, and you find them under UV and Paint up here. And these are the ones here. We have the Soften tool, we have the Pinch tool, and we have the Inflate tool. And they do exactly what you think they do. One smooths things out, one pinches things, so makes edges sharper, and one inflates things. And those three tools in combination, that's kind of the bread and butter of what I keep using in ZBrush as well as Blender all the time, because those three tools really get you to the results that you need. So let me show you the Soften tool, and I'll show you some tricks of how to isolate these things that you find them easier. So it's a little difficult to see with the figure. I'm going to go and switch the figure off, and we'll see these are the kind of kinks that we want to iron out. So with the correct strength, I think 50 might be a little much. I'm going to tone this down. Still a little bit difficult to see, but this is kind of the kink I want to get rid of. I can just go and left click and drag over that, and it just goes and magically disappears. I go and make the size a little larger. That's maybe too large here. Maybe 6. So that's disappeared already. On the other side, it doesn't have symmetry for sculpting this way. It doesn't really have symmetry. It does have symmetry, but not on garments like these, because they may not be symmetrical. Just go and do this. And that's essentially already taken care of the ugly problem that we've had. There was still a little bit of a kink in the middle here. So you can either go smooth that out a little bit more. And you can use this trick once you dial in your custom character. So every time you see something ugly like this on your clothing, you could just go and wipe over that and be done with that. So that's essentially it. You have these buttons here. So once you made a change, you have to press accept or apply. Either of them will work. And then we can go and send this back to Daz Studio. This might be a little bit indented now. So if we needed a bit more, breast coming out here, we can use a tiny bit of the inflate brush, because that'll help us out here. Inflate tool. And once again, size could be a little larger. Strength could be a little lower, like 20. Brush over that. Poke through history. It's very cool. So if I had symmetry here, I could use it. Brush over that. Sometimes when it's a bit too strong, so I've done it a little bit too strong here. Turn down the strength. Try again. Literally very, very subtly. Strength. Fugazi likes doing things with a really low strength, and I appreciate that. It's sometimes, better doing things subtle than too much. It's a little tough to see, and it's a little clunky compared to, I'm going to go back to the Soften tool, compared to the compared to the other flashy tools we have. But it's free and it's integrated well with Daz Studio. See, I've gone way back into the, don't know why it doesn't, oh, I keep forgetting to put the strength down here. That smooths it out. So this is basically, no matter which application you use, you always go between these two things, the soften versus the inflate. Then in other applications, you also have the move brush. That's kind of nice, cloth move and stuff like that. There, so that's sorted that. Hit accept. And this is then what you spend a lot of time with when you go and convert clothing. Let's go send it back. Send to Daz Studio. And here, this is kind of, it's one of those workflow things that you need to get used to. Usually, if this was done in the base figure, we can go and use the defaults other than yeah, you can use the defaults, but if you use something like a custom character and a post character, you want to set reverse deformations always to yes. I recommend you use that. And then here in Hexagon Morph, you can go and call it something like front smooth, and then you create a morph with that, and you hit accept. Morph created successfully. That's what we want. Nothing appears to have happened, but that's because you have to dial up the morph. So it's a non-destructive process. So under morphs here, front smooth, you go dial that in, and issue has been taken care of. So that's great. That is good. And if you have a custom character that introduces other issues, you can handle that just the same. So that's a really valuable thing. We'll do this another couple of times with, with different ways of working and, practice this. But this is literally what it takes to fix clothing items manually. And you would have noticed this takes a lot of time. Right, Tuck? Exactly. The power of Hexagon. Totally true. And this takes a lot of time, which brings me back to the number one point that I made. If you can, don't convert clothing items at all, because it does you a favor in the long run. I'm glad you like it, Trevor. I'm glad you like it. You could use the same trick as we did before with updating the base geometry. Let me show you this again. So now that we have this fixed here, I like to set the parameters here to not go into the negative, which is something that Mesh Grabber actually does by default. So if we say this is now the fixed clothing item, let me go and export that out. If you didn't want to dial this morph in every time, and if you think, hey, I want this to be fixed for good, this is going to be sports bra fixed, sports bra G9, I should say, fixed as OBJ. Let's go with the Daz Studio template and filter object selected roots here. Once again, that's important. And is this high res or not? I keep forgetting to check that. Mesh Illusion's base res, so that's good. If it had been high res, that wouldn't have been great, but I think the moment you send something back from Hexagon, it leaves this on base res. So Hexagon itself handles base res, but then when it sends it back, I think this doesn't get sent back to high res. So it's kind of, in our case, this was my lucky escape. So make sure Mesh Resolution is set to base. Then we head over to export, and this was sports bra G9 fixed. And once again, Daz Studio preset, filter objects by selected roots, hit accept, and that sends that out as an OBJ. So now we go back into our morph and set this back to 0, which is now the unfixed thing. We could even go and delete this morph. We don't need it anymore with edit mode. And then we can go and right click on this and say delete selected property. Then it goes away. Switch it back into non-edit mode. And now we can update this base geometry with edit object geometry, update base geometry, update full geometry from file. And then we go and use this one here, sports bra G9 fixed, open, accept. Also Daz Studio preset here, accept. Boom. Material, yeah, debatable. I don't even know why it changes, but you know, just apply the other material again, and now you have it fixed for good. You don't have to dial in the morph anymore. The morph doesn't interfere with things anymore. It's one less thing to load, and we've got fixed clothing item. Cool, isn't it? I really like that. So then, if we stick with this, and I'll just go and see if I can find the correct material for this. Was it MDL? There we go. MDL sports bar. Yes, there we go. Perfect. So if we had something like a custom character, we can apply the same fixes and just the same kind of tools just for a practice run. I might just do that. Thank you, Nate. I'm glad you like it. I'm glad you like it. Not 1500%, no. So let's say one of the newer figures here. Oh yeah, one other thing that is important to remember: if you have adjustment morphs in your source clothing that, you know, do certain things like, you know, strap down, or, you know, pull shirt up, or some adjustment morphs, make this wider, make this, you know, whatever, those things, when you convert clothing, they'll usually get lost, so they will be removed. Be aware of that. This is another thing why you might want to keep point number one in mind at all times. Is it a good idea for me to do this? So maybe it's not, because you're going to lose a lot of the functionality that is built into some of the clothing items, basically because you have to re-infer all the rigging, and that means you're going to lose some of these morphs. Just be aware of that. Yes, do you know what? Good point. And we're going to do that after that. Let's go deal with the custom character, and then we're going to do that the other way around, because that's another good principle to remember. So we go into as in Genesis 9, and we go into actor, and we go maybe into people, and we'll say Ali. I'm not quite familiar with Ali. You're Ali, okay. That we could. Ali's kind of okay here, other than maybe needs a bit of smoothing modification applied to this. I think they would all need to do that. Yeah, smoothing modifier is disabled. So as soon as you enable it, just with 2 iterations, we're okay. So that's kind of nice. That's also one of the benefits of using Genesis 9. So as if you have a clothing item that's made for Genesis 9, or that you've converted to Genesis 9, and it looks okay on the base figure, most of the morphs that you dial in within reason will work well with the clothing. So the clothing kind of behaves better as follower clothing, I find. Peephole, Angela perhaps? Yeah, Angela is a good example. Angela has some issues here, and often you see it on the breasts, but you can literally see it everywhere. So this is something we can also fix with the same principle in Hexagon. See if I can find something that's even worse. Who else came out fairly new recently under figures here? Olympia, right? Yes, Olympia and Olivia. There we go. Those are fairly new figures. There's also, is Kiri a woman, or was that a man? Yeah, that was okay. That's another good thing that we just saw here before the smoothing modifier went to work. This is it before it kicked in, and this is it after it kicked in. So smoothing modifier does a lot of stuff automatically, and I'll say more about this in a second. How to handle this. Olivia's, look, this is a good example. Before and after, so smoothing modifier does do a good job. And then we had Olympia 9. I might stick with Olivia, because I think that was a good thing to see. So with Olivia dialed in, that's a custom character now. Could be like 4 morphs here, that's also fine. But if we stick with one custom character, your particular custom character, you see how good the smoothing modifier actually is. But it also overdoes it in some parts. And so when you send this over to Hexagon now, it doesn't have the smoothing modifier, and it will send over the unsmoothed mesh. And as a result, you might find something that is weird when you look at it. So what I recommend you do is, on your item of clothing, you disable the smoothing modifier and then make the fix, only because this will let you see what actually needs changing. We're still in base resolution. That also makes a difference if this was in high resolution, if you'd switch that over. And I'll show you in a moment how to do that. This only is base res, but we can turn it into high res. That might make things better a little bit. So let's go do this. Let's go and send this over quickly, and let's fix it, and then we'll see how that goes. So Hexagon is a little bit weird. Sometimes you can literally just send stuff over if there's things in there already, but it might not update it. So essentially you have to go and delete stuff out of Hexagon, out of this out of object mode, and then you can go and, with the top figure selected here, anything that's parented will be sent over. File, sent to Hexagon, and then I'll talk a little bit more about about how to navigate around, just in case you're not quite familiar with this. I'm thinking of doing a little mini series on how to use Hexagon, because it's just such a good helper tool. You've got your mouse scroll wheel to zoom in and out, of course, but it matters where the mouse is. So if it's over here and I zoom in here, then we zoom directly where the mouse is parked. So this is something you might have to get used to. It's actually really handy, but you know, if you're thinking, hey, that's not what I want to see right now, then it's sometimes weird and you don't realize it. You have to park the cursor where you want to zoom in, and then you scroll the mouse wheel. Then Alt left click, that's Maya navigation essentially. Alt left click will rotate around the object on the screen, and then Alt right click will pan. Way too much stuff, right? Yes, indeed. We need to get rid of things. I need to do a little bit of a clear out. Oh, Brian, that is just so important. By default, if you use Hexagon, and the brushes, basically, you will encounter something that isn't pretty. And let me just show you this on the Genesis 9 figure, just because that's nice and gray here. I have it already tweaked, but if I go back to UV and paint and just go to the soften tool, I can go and move my cursor over the just without left clicking. I can just move this and it looks okay. But sometimes you'll see that there's like thousands of cursors drawn over, and this is the article that Brian's just linked to. There's a tweak in that, and I've forgotten exactly where it is. This is why I've made that article that shows you how to avoid that. So if you go and you have this brush ghosting, then there's a way to get rid of that. These brushes are a little bit difficult to find, and Hexagon has a neat way of putting things into your own custom tab that I really like, and that is in fact this custom tab here. Mine is completely empty, but it lets you assemble things that you use a lot and that you may have difficulty finding. So the three I use are under UV paint, and they're these ones here. They're the soften tool, the pinch tool, and the inflate tool. Those are the three. But the others, I might forget where they are. So you can just go and right click any of these icons, and then it says, hey, would you like to add this tool to your custom palette? And then you say yes. That's cool. And maybe we're going to go for another one, maybe the pinch tool here. Right click. Would you like to add that to your custom palette? Yes. And inflate as well. Right click. Yeah, so that's just a right click there. And then on my custom palette, I only have these three icons. You have another one that takes this custom palette off, and then you can have it floating around. But now I can use these icons, and you can mix and match with other things. So Hexagon is kind of nice in that you can do this brushing, but you can also do things like, you know, select the bottom part of the bra and pull all that down, or, you know, with soft selection, pick apart. That's on just with the regular selection cursor here. You can pick one of those faces, pick it, and then say, you know, soft selection, and make that a little bit less of a radius. If you needed to do anything to these things, you just go, you pull these things out, move them up, and do whatever you like. And if you have something like soft selection enabled, you can do quite exciting things with it, and really stretch your clothing into areas that they weren't going. Avoid poke through super easy with these things. You can also say abort, and then the whole thing goes away again. So that's vertex tools. They're quite nice, but the brush tools are just super invaluable. So if I go switch back over here to the soften tool, it takes a moment for it to undo its thing here, and we'll shame there are no different viewport draw styles here that let us strength of like 15 will work fine. Let's go smooth this out. If only I could see it properly, huh? There, smoothed out. Good to err on the side of something with not all that much strength. And just take your sweet little time with these things as well. If you overdo it, are we actually on the right tool? Yes. If you overdo it, you can always inflate it out. Like, that certainly got rid of that kink, but I've gone into the figure a little bit here. I mean, for a free tool, I'm saying this is pretty exciting, because these tools just, with better visuals, that's what you pay the guys from ZBrush for, really. Blender has these tools as well, but Blender, I totally hear you when you say, hey, Jay, Blender is just intimidating as hell. I understand. I think that's pretty exciting. Hit accept. File sent to Daz Studio. And so now we can do something to literally replace these, not as a generic morph, but we could have had a look, and rather than calling this hexagon morph, we could have had a look, what is this morph called that is causing this distortion? So let me go and cancel out of this and have a look on my item of clothing, on parameters on currently used. I currently don't see anything, and that's because this adjustment morph here, that's essentially the custom character morph that the item of clothing says, oh, I don't see this, I don't know this, I'm going to create it on the fly, but it's a hidden morph. So let's go over here on the parameters tab on this 3 hamburger icon thing, show hidden properties, and then we can see this here is Olivia body and Olivia head. So this here is in fact the name that is causing my distortion. Let's see. I was going to say, do you see that here? But no, it wasn't in vision. So this is what's causing this distortion here. So if we just go and override this morph, then we don't have to redial it up. So all we need to do then is go into the parameter settings, copy that name out, Olivia 9 body BS body, just copy. Then go back to Hexagon, send this over again, and when the import dialog asks us what's the name of the morph, we'll just give it that and it'll overwrite it, and then this issue disappears immediately. Watch this. Create a morph. That's perfect. We want that name. Double click and just paste that in. Morph subdivision, no. Reverse deformation, super important, yes. And also under override existing, we want to make sure it says deltas only. Make unique means there's got to be a unique morph, and it'll detect, hey, that morph already exists, I need a different name. But if you say deltas only, it'll go and override this. Hit accept. And the morph's already applied. Furthermore, if we now go and take our figure, dial her in and out a little bit, this change that we've just made applies smoothly. So if we only need the figure like 30%, it'll still look good without there being another distortion. So ha ha ha. And we talked more about this in our previous stream, but the same principles apply here. So there we go. Exciting. Let me have a quick look at the chat, and then we're going to have a look at how do we reverse engineer clothing from Genesis 9 over to Genesis 8. Oh, Tuck, that is a good idea. That is something, yes, absolutely, under Preference Editor. The undo buffer, right? Do you remember where that was? MISC, perhaps? Yes, maximum undo levels. Do not leave this on 10. Leave this on, you know, here. It's very important. Blender is notorious for that as well. I think by default it has 32 undo levels, but it literally remembers everything. So 32 isn't exactly 32 operations, more like 10. So yeah, very, very good point of doing that. So Hexagon, you know, as clunky as it is, for me, it's a really, really cool, invaluable tool, and we get it for free. And this integration with Daz Studio is just awesome. It's like Mesh Grabber on steroids, really. But people are intimidated by it because you really have to know, you know, what you're doing. Should I save this? I could save this. I'll go and save it here as G8 conversion demo. Perfect. That is good, yes. Oh, you have the MMX Genesis 9 clones for all. I saw that product by Matty. Yes, indeed. In the hope that this will sort my G9 clothing on G8, but haven't tried it yet. I haven't tried it either. If I understand it correctly, those are AutoFit clones. And so they are, so if we go back to Genesis 8, just as an example, and I go and just trigger this item of wardrobe here again. This auto fit dialog, it has this what figure is this type thing. And if I understand it correctly, that MMX product puts more things in here. So I think you can then go and pick something like Victoria 4 and it knows what that is. I haven't tried this out yet, but I think that's what it's for. I think it integrates more with that. So these clones, we're going to actually talk about them now. I'll go cancel out of this. They are handy because they let you turn the Genesis 9 figure into other shapes, and with it the clothing it wears. And that's kind of the big secret about converting clothing from Genesis 9 down to other figures, because the Genesis 9 figure has that functionality built in. In fact, all figures, Genesis 8, 3, 2, 1, they all had this built in for at least the previous generation, if not a few more generations before that. So what I mean by that is on Genesis 9 here, you can head over to the parameters and then head over to the hidden section here. And for that to appear, you need to have the hidden properties enabled there, show hidden properties. Under hidden, you've got this category called clones. And it's a little difficult to see here because they're all dark gray, but I can left click and drag and turn Genesis 9 into the Genesis 1 figure. It retains the A pose, but the body shape turns into the Genesis 1 figure that way. And we have all the other ones as well. So we've got Genesis 2 female and Genesis 2 male. So if you wanted to convert a Genesis 9 clothing item into one of the older generations, that's actually fairly easy to do, because you would just go and make this figure wear the item it's supposed to wear, which it will fit. Then you dial up one of these clones like let's say Genesis 8, let's say Genesis 3 female, then you export the now so shaped clothing item and load the Genesis 3 figure, load its OBJ, the one that you've just exported, and then you run transfig utility, and that's your clothing item. So again, it will require quite a bit of manual work to make it work with your custom characters, but that's the principle. And I believe the MMX clones, they just expand this list, I think. But I'd like to try this out as well. So, let me know once you've had a chance to test it, how you're finding it. And this is inspired by a question that Danny asked me the other day. I'm going to go into my Genesis 9 Starter Essentials and load the basic shirt here, the G9 basic shirt, which of course for G9 fits really well. The cool thing now is that if I go back to this menu that I've just shown you and go and turn this into Genesis, now if I export this shirt and run the transfig utility on the original Genesis figure, it'll fit perfectly and there's no poke through. It just, the Genesis 9 figure kind of just does this, and that's really beautiful. I really like that. So Genesis 8 female as an example. Look at how beautiful this is. This is shaping itself already. There's no kinks underneath the breast. There's no breast hugging phenomenon. It retains its looseness. It retains the crinkles. So this is actually really cool. So same with the Genesis 8 male here. Or in fact, Genesis 2 male or Genesis 2 female. So it's kind of cool that if you had something like a Genesis 9 clothing item and it behaves like this one does, you can go and export this out and then just run the transfig utility even on older generations. This is really cool. Like people who've been making a webcomic or something for 10 years and you think, you know what, I'm still attached to my Genesis 2 characters because I'm really invested in them. But of course, no one's making clothing for them anymore. You can go and retrofit that like so. So let's use the Genesis 8 female as our example here. So with Genesis 9 selected and the clothing item fitted to that figure, head over to parameters, under hidden, over to the clones, dial up the figure that you need. Then you go and select that shirt, like in my case, the G9 base shirt. I'll go and say File, Export. And I'll call this one G9 shirt for G8F, just so that we know what that is. 100%. Didn't check the resolution again. Dang, Jay, get it together. High resolution. Set that to base resolution. So sorry about that. Mesh smoothing. We can leave that on for now. That's okay. Base res. If you're PA, you can use high res, but if you're not, you can't. So sorry about that. So G9 shirt for G8F. Filter objects, selected routes only, very important. That's that. I'm going to go and make the whole figure with everything invisible. If you just click the eyeball icon, only the top node will be made invisible. If you hold Control and click the eyeball icon, everything that's parented will also be made invisible. And now I'll go and load in my Genesis 8 def load figure, 8.1. I don't really mind. It doesn't make much of a difference, except for the characters I can dial in. So perhaps I should have used 8.1. It's fine. Trevor, it's one of those things, it's closely guarded secret. I know many people who've been putting their items into groups so that they can disable everything in a group. But yeah, Control eyeball icon is the way to go. So here's Genesis 8. And if we now go ahead with File, Import, and grab our shirt, brain's frozen. Which one was it again? G9 shirt for GF8. There we go. That's the one. Let's go import that. The old materials will still work on this. And now that I think about it, you could have also exported the high-res version because we're not importing a morph. This is a brand new clothing item. So you could have used high-res here because we're going to infer the rigging. So this is now the static item of clothing. And if I go and move my Genesis 8 figure, clothing doesn't move with it. So classic phenomenon that we don't like. Let me just go and give it that material. Well, I'll do that at the end. So to infer the rigging now, this is what you would do if you had something like a brand new clothing item. You can go and click on the Scene tab's context menu. Under Assets, you find the transfer utility. You can also, if you don't like the term hamburger icon, you can also get this menu by right-clicking on any of the tabs. So each tab has this context menu, and if you right-click on Scene, then the same menu comes up. Like, you know, on surfaces, there's some cool tools. And so in our case, we need the transfer utility. And it tells us under show options here, it has a few things for us. Source item is in fact the Genesis 8 female figure, so your donor figure, so to say. And then the target item is that unrigged shirt. We do that. There's some parameters you can play with here. I'm going to leave everything at the default, including here add smoothing modifier. You can add one immediately if you like, or you can do that later. I might just go and add one immediately and hit OK. You can set a projection template and all that. I'm just going to use the defaults here. And now we have Genesis 8 figure with the 9 shirt parented underneath it. And also icon has changed. So it is now a fitted affair. And now we can go and move my figure, and the shirt will move with it. So now we're basically at the point where we need to address issues as they pop up again, because while this works nicely on the base figure, you can now go and fix things once again with Hexagon or ZBrush or Marvelous Designer when you dial in the custom characters. So under actor people, let's say like Go Luck, for example, that works well, so that doesn't cause any issues. How about Bridget? Bridget doesn't cause any issues either, so that's quite nice. Daisy, any issues? No, look at that. So this is actually very cool, I gotta say. Retrofitted a Genesis 9 item on Genesis 8 female, and or on Genesis 8 male as well. That's the other cool thing. If you have a Genesis 9 item, it can now fit either the male or the female version, so you can go and save those things out. That's kind of nice. Mrs. Chow can wear that shirt as well. Does she? Oh no, those are just her HD details. Yeah, Mrs. Chow, that's working nice. Good stuff. So once again, you can go and kink things out. If the shirt is a bit too long, you can make it shorter with tools in Hexagon if you want. But yeah, same thing. If you do get things like kinked in issues that we talked about, same way of fixing it applies. And the same thing with the smoothing modifier as well applies here. So, you know, this is, even though I don't see that much of breast hugging, I think this could do with smoothing out. So one thing about this, what I told you about the smoothing modifier, you can overdo it and use a little bit of caution if you use it. Like if I set this to, like say 100 on the shirt, while Daz Studio calculates this, look at what happens to the crinkles here. All this nice detail can disappear. It hasn't right now, which is nice, but that is something that can happen. So if you overdo it with the smoothing modifier, you may be able to lose some detail that you wish it's, you know, like this is a good example here. If I've changed this to generic, and you know, do try both options. One might give you better results on your clothing item than the others. All this funky detail is now gone, and that's not very good. So that actually looked better before. So yeah, you don't want to overdo it. Is my point. I want to show you one last thing, and we touched on this last time as well, how you can bring Genesis 8 items onto G9 with the developer tools that are built into Genesis 9. They're kind of cool as well. So if we have time, we'll talk about that. But I'll have a look through the chat and see if there's any questions that you guys had that I totally didn't notice. Gold Miner had a good question. Just for clarification, non-developers can export high resolution, but not the re-imported item for modification. That is, that is exactly right. That's exactly how it works. You get problems when just making sure we're still on air. My return has crashed. I hope we're still, no, we're still good. That's good. So when I let me go and get rid of the shirt here quickly, and I just wanted to clarify that as well, because that's a good point. Let me go and get rid of Sydney here on the Genesis 8 figure. Sydney goes away. We've got the base figure again, and I'll go and remove. Whoops! I'll remove the shirt and make that figure invisible and bring my Genesis 9 figure back with the shirt. And we can actually, let me go and use the Genesis 8 male now. So let's do that with my Genesis figure selected here. Under hidden, under clones, I'll go and dial out Genesis 8 female, and I dial in Genesis 8 male, just to show you essentially, essentially the same process with the shirt, but in high res. So I'll show you what you can and what you can't do. So on the shirt, you head over to general mesh resolution, and you can set this to high res, and you can now export it as high res, and then you can import it again, and you can re-rig it again as high res. You can totally do that. That's no problem. In the case of the shirt, it doesn't really make a difference because the shirt isn't higher res than high res. So it'll still be base res, and you could apply the high res modifier on the target shirt. That's actually going to give you the same result. But if you wanted to, you can go and export this shirt in high res and then rig it in high res. You can totally do that. What you can't do is export this as high res, make a modification, and then use Morph Loader to import a high res morph into your clothing item. That doesn't work. The morphs, like the fixes that we've done in Hexagon, they all need to happen at base resolution. PAs, they have a tool that's integrated into Morph Loader that allows you to import a subdivided model, and then it kind of reverse calculates that and only imports the HD resolution. But that is proprietary technology, and that is only for Daz PA. So even PAs on other marketplaces don't have access to that tool. And if you do use this tool, you're only allowed to distribute high-res meshes when you sell them on the Daz store. It's kind of a perk, if you will, for the Daz store. Yes, thank you so much. Absolutely. Those are really good products, and they trigger, if you want to make clothing, those products, they will trigger the poses that will, get you the kinks, the ones we talked about last time, the ones that you need to work on. So let me go and do this then. I'm going to go and export this shirt out. There we go. And I'll call this one G9 shirt for G8M. There we go. And it is now high res, and it'll totally work. Filter, object, selected roots, yes. Make invisible. Go to this one, Genesis 8.1 male def load I'll use. And then we can rerun this again. And in case, so there's an interesting kink that happens now when I do this. We'll import the shirt, and it'll be as high res as I've just left it, but it'll still say base res because it still has the high resolution, but it doesn't have the high resolution modifier on it. So, and I'll show you how to import that, how to add that if you ever needed that. G8M, here we go. 100% looking great. Run transfer utility fitting shirt. So yeah, if I go and look at this shirt now, or let me just go and fix it. Let me just use the transfer utility and use Genesis 8 male, and then use the shirt as an option. Projection template, this is what I talked about earlier. You can leave none, or you can imply one of the better ones. On Genesis 9, you have much more options that let you fit dresses and things like looser clothing items a bit better. Esha has actually explained in one of her tutorials how to set this up. So if you had something that you wish you made a figure, you modified a figure, and you want to use it as a projection template, there are ways to do this. And in one of Esha's longer courses, she explains how to do that. So it's worth looking into. If you needed one for earrings, for example, that's kind of cool. I'm going to add smoothing modifier, hit accept. And now we have, come on. Rigged shirt. All right. So if I go and select that on parameters, it still says just base resolution. And, you know, this is already a subdivided mesh, but if you wanted to make it even higher res, or if you had an object that you import and you wanted to see the additional detail, like, you know, a good example is always here, the sphere primitive, and we'll use a sphere. We'll use maybe 1 meter. This one's relatively low res. If you look on the side here, you can literally see the flat polygons. If I go and use the texture shaded view, you can see, you know, it's not the highest res sphere, and you can see some low res bits and pieces here. If you wanted to add that to an object, you can head over to Edit, Object, Geometry, Convert to Sub-D, and that will give us this option to change it from base res to high res. And it'll also give us this option to say, well, how much subdivision do we want to add into this? So if you wanted to see more, then, you know, now you have a huge deal more, and you have a much softer curve. So this is implied subdivision. It doesn't actually exist. It just happens, and it gets added on the fly, so to say. And we can do this on our shirt as well. Not that we need to do that, but if we wanted to, currently no high res there. If ever you needed that, because it does make your objects look less edgy, so it's well worth considering. And especially if you use this, then you can always switch it back if you find you don't need it. If you have, you know, more geometry than you need, you can. It's just about visible here that you have the extra subdivision. Yeah, so you can use that. All right. So there's one other, just a small thing that I wanted to maybe touch on in the last 10 minutes here. And this goes back to transferring Genesis 8 items to Genesis 9, and AutoFit isn't working, and maybe you don't have the Riversoft sickle yield converter, and you want to do it completely manual, and you want to bring things into the Genesis 9 figure. You can use the built-in developer tools to help you out a little bit. And let me show you how that works, because it's quite cool. It's really nice. And for those of you who haven't seen the previous stream, this is kind of just a nice thing to remember what we can do. And it comes for free as part of the Genesis 9 figure. And also, if you do have any questions, you know, drop them in the chat now, no problem. Those two links that Brian's posted, Trevor, one is for the Genesis 9 figure and one's for the Genesis 8 figure. They're both posing products, and they are special poses that trigger these JCMs. We talked more about this in the previous stream, and it's more important for clothing creators to understand how those work. But if you do make adjustments, it's kind of good to know, you know, what the implications are. So yeah, it's just for if you develop for Genesis 9, then the Genesis 9 product is for you. And if you develop for Genesis 8, then the PJCM product is for you. They're the same thing, but they've changed the naming convention on with Genesis 8 and previous. They were called partial joint control morphs, and they're essentially triggered when something, you know, on your figure happens, like you know, lifting an arm. And if you do this, oops, like so, that'll trigger a JCM under the hood inside Genesis 9. If you go to the top level and you say currently used, you can see that these things are kind of triggered here. So CBS shoulder and body control left pectoral. Those are two morphs, hidden morphs that are dialed up. If we were to dial them down, this is actually what the figure would look like if we just bent the geometry. And that doesn't look good, but that's as much as the joints and the weight maps can do to make that bend, you know, in the geometry. So to make that look good, Daz have gone in and sculpted these things in to make the figure look good. So one was this bulge that'll just get, you know, shoves this in, and the other one was lifting the pectoral up, and then it looks like a natural movement on this joint. So every joint potentially has these things, and you don't really know which joint has them until you try it out. And if you have an item of follower clothing, it doesn't have these morphs in there, and Daz Studio detects that and says, hey, well, I got to do something here, and it's trying its best to do this, and it usually gets it wrong because it doesn't really know what exactly it needs to do, and as a result your item of clothing looks pretty bad. I can show you this with the thing that you take in with transfer utility, and clothing will look bad here. So that is when you need to make a note of these names. Go into your 3D modeler, make sure that looks okay with the reference figure, and then overwrite this morph. And those are the PJCMs, partial joint control morphs, or like we call them now with Genesis 9, the corrective blend shapes. It's all exactly the same thing. It's all exactly the same principle. And it will, yes, it'll essentially, it needs to be corrected in each item of clothing that you use. And clothing creators do this all the time, and there's a lot of work that goes in to make these things look good. So let's go back to any of the Genesis 8 wardrobe items. See what else I have here. We can use the base shirt, but we can also see if I can have something else here. Maybe we'll actually stick with the Genesis, with the base shirt, just because I know it kind of, you know, it works well. We can demonstrate what we need. I'll go stick with the tank top here, and I'm gonna go and load it in, but I'll make sure I don't want to trigger auto fit. Was I in the right thing? I think I didn't want to do that. Don't do that. I think I was in the wrong section here. Don't select the figure, just load in the item of clothing. So we want it to look like this, basically. It doesn't fit. And if you wanted to do a complete manual auto fit, and you don't want Daz Studio to do anything, and you want to be in charge of every step of the way, consider using these developer tools. They come with the Genesis 9 figure, and they're also found on the parameters tab. If you open Genesis 9 up under utilities, you'll find this button here, developer tools. If you click that, this little menu comes up, and it gives you kind of a slightly easier way to rig your clothing items. So first of all, we can see that my Genesis 8 female item doesn't fit my Genesis 9 figure at all, and it's in a completely, it's even in the wrong spot, and it just doesn't really work. So what we need to do is change Genesis 9 into the Genesis 8 shape, and then use that as essentially the base morph, so to run transfer utility. And that could be done if I head over to my hidden clones morph, and then go and dial up Genesis 8 female. So now the figure fits the shirt perfectly, but it's a morph that's dialed up, so I can't run transfig utility because transfig utility needs the whole figure to be in zero non-morphed state. So these developer tools make that possible. We have an option here that's called set G9 to shape, and with my figure selected, you can select that, and then you can go and pick either the Genesis 8 female or the 8 male shape. And so the female is the one that I just dialed up there manually. I'm going to select that and hit accept. And when I do that, another little dialog comes up that says, you know, would you like to zero or restore? We want to do restore here. And now that morph is dialed up, but notice it's set to 0. So this is now the base morph of my Genesis 9 figure. It looks like Genesis 8, which is exciting, which is really cool. It's also favorited that, so if I don't know where to find it, I can just go to favorites, and you know, then I can go and dial this back out. So like minus 100 is now the Genesis 9 figure, and 0 is the Genesis 8 female figure. So this is good news. This is number one. Number two is we can go and use the second option here, which is called the create follower option. And that runs the transfig utility under the hood from a script here. For that, I have to go and select my follower clothing. So if I go and do this now, it goes, please select an item that isn't already rigged. So like this thing here, basic wear tank top, it's not going to work because it says, hey, that has rigging already. I'm expecting something that isn't rigged at all. So sometimes, not always, but sometimes you can convert a rigged figure into a non-rigged figure. And the command for that is up here under edit, object or figure, doesn't matter. Rigging, convert prop to figure, figure, rigging, convert figure to prop. And what that does is strip out the rigging. It works on most items that are rigged, but it doesn't work on all items. If you try to use it on Genesis figures like Genesis 3 and 2, you might run into an issue because the figure is too complex, so it can't do that. In that case, export as OBJ and import again to strip out the rigging. Let's convert figure to prop. Let's see if it works. Yes, look at that, it works. Icon is changed. There's no more rigging in here. And with that, I can now go and create follower clothing for this item. Whoops. Follower clothing. It runs transfig utility and it looks okay, so it looks really good. If I go and move my Genesis 9 figure now, it'll work well, so that's good. But Genesis 9 isn't Genesis 9, and the shirt isn't in the Genesis 9 shape yet either, so we need to go and fix that. So we go and make that happen. First of all, we go select the Genesis 9 figure, go to your favorites and dial out the Genesis 8 morph. So now we have the Genesis 9 basic morph, and we also see these issues here that we saw happen with the autofit. So it's kind of the same issues that we have, but we also know how to fix it now, which is kind of cool. So with that, in the minus 100 position, we can select the follower and say update follower base shape. So the script is now going to tell this item of clothing, hey, disregard any dialed in morphs. What you look like now, the shape that you have now, is supposed to be your 0 base shape. And we're going to do that, update follower base shape, donk. As a result, it tries to go and follow the minus 100 morph. It looks totally terrible. It's totally cool, don't panic. We go select the Genesis 9 figure again and reset its morph back to here via script. So it is now, it's still set to this, Genesis 8 morph. So we can go back to set G9 to shape and choose restore from Genesis 8 female back to Genesis 9 and go restore. Then that morph here will disappear. Genesis 9 looks like Genesis 9 and the shirt fits again. And this is kind of how these developer tools can be really helpful. Set G9 to shape, whatever your clothing looks like, then create the follower, which runs the transfig utility, makes us fit. Then we update the base shape for the clothing item, and then we reset the Genesis 9 shape, and then you've got a base shape that you get started from. And now we either use our our smoothing modifier trick again, just like we did before, because it looks a little kinked here, doesn't it? We use our smoothing modifier trick again. We already have mesh smoothing here. Mesh resolution is base versus high res. So if this is going to become the new base shape, I think we can do it in high res. We can try it out. We can try it out in here. Let's go try 50 iterations and see what that does. And then we just bring this back and update our base geometry, and then we don't need the smoothing modifier again. Still calculating. Amaranth, how you doing? Good to see you. Rigging is so not much fun at all. Good to see you. So it's kind of worked here, but if we try this instead of base shape matching, let's try generic, and let's see what that does moments later. What do you mean, Go Miner? Generic didn't quite work either. So base shape matching is probably that. We can try 100. Let's treat ourselves. See what happens. Technically, it was a female shirt, yes, but that's neither here nor there. It needs to be removed, right? If I wanted to have it on a unisex shape, if I wanted to have my man wear that, then I can't have these kinks there. But it's easy to fix. So if we don't get it done with the base shape matching, I've shown you how to do it in Hexagon. There's easy ways to also do this in Blender as well as ZBrush. So it's really just a quick touch up. You can also look at the weight maps. Come on. There we go. Perfect. So let's say this is good enough. Let's say this is good enough. And I go and export the tank top fixed out now. And I'll see if this works with HD, updating the base geometry. I've never really tried that. So let's say this is the tank top G9 HD as OBJ. So remember, filter objects needs to be enabled, selected routes, and at 100%. Let's go do that. Export this out. Takes a second because we've made it, I think we've made it double HD, didn't we? I don't quite remember. Yes, these kinks, I suppose they get inferred because of the transfer utility. Oh no, actually not because of the transfer utility, because we reverse engineered the shape into Genesis 9, and that didn't work great. Sometimes you can see that's taking an awful long time, doesn't it? Sometimes you can, if you switch over to the wireframe view, you can see that the geometry literally collapses in on itself on some of the morphs you dial up. If you see that, that's usually a good indication that something needs to change. Let me go switch this back to 2, and in fact 2 we can probably leave the defaults here. And now let's go with the shirt selected, edit, object or figure, doesn't matter, geometry, update base geometry, see if that works. Tank top G9 HD, yeah, 63 megabytes, that's quite large for that kind of shirt. And 100% is good. And the imported geometry does not match the geometry. So okay, so we can't use HD. That answers that question. Gold Miner, that answers that question. I like it. That answers that question. So if we had done this in base res, so we need to be in base res for that as well. I had never tried that before. And we say, I think 100 was good enough for that. We need to just let it calculate again. And then we can do that. And we basically get rid of that kink without it being an adjustment morph. Yes, I was supposed to have done that, Anita. We tried this earlier in base res and it works all good. And I was wondering if I can actually replace the geometry with something higher res, but I guess that doesn't work. So now we know. Mediocrities. My goodness, Nate, that's funny. Okay, come on. Nearly there. Did you have any other questions? Because now is the time to ask. We have kind of 5 to 10 minutes, more than happy to answer anything that I know and share with you. Hey, this is good. Let's go on. We're definitely on base res, right? Yes. Export tank top. I should really call this SD now. There we go. I've done something bad now. I said, well, yeah, I'm going to go just overwrite it because we can't use it anymore. Filter objects, yes. Make sure. And yes. For Genesis 3, yes. Gen 4, you mean Victoria 4? If so, that might be problematic because we don't really have. It might work with the MMX product. I think Matty's released a product that that brings other clone shapes for Genesis 9 in there. Let me just go see if I can find it while this is going on here. I think it's called Clones for All. So Genesis 3, yes. This yeah, there we go. That's the one. MMX Genesis 9 Clones for All. So it does not have support for Victoria 4 or for the 4th generation. But with that, you might be able to do this. We already have blend shapes for Genesis all the way up to Genesis 8 in the Genesis 9 figure. So we just don't have them as elegantly integrated into the development tools as we have Genesis 8. Smoothing can be set to that. And now we go into Object, Geometry, Update Base Geometry with the file, which is this one, and yes, aside from the glossiness, so I don't know why the material freaks out, but yeah, there we go. That is now corrected without there being a smoothing modifier on there. I mean, there is, but you know, 2 iterations, it's basically disabled. Right. Yes. So if you wanted to convert Victoria 4 clothing, let me think. You may have to go via the original Genesis figure. That is by default, without spending any money, the only figure that has a clone for for Victoria 4 in there. Whoops. Daz Studio has counted a fatal error. Must close. That's a shame, isn't it? Dang. That is unexpected. Let me just reopen that. We'll see if we can do that. Dang. So yeah, I think Genesis 1 and 2, they both have clones for the original Victoria 4 figure in there. Let me have a quick look while we're here. I think even including Genesis 2, does that work? Let me draw with a nail. So all the previous figure generations, they all had like at least one figure below them, and I think Genesis 2 had 2, and Genesis 9 has several, but it only goes up to Genesis. So under hidden you have clones, and you have Genesis and Genesis 2 female. Okay, so that's just one generation, so you may have to go via the original Genesis figure then. Genesis, don't crash on me. There we go, original Genesis. So if you head over to parameters, clones, these are all locked here, but you have things for Ico 4, Freak 4, Hero 4, and so forth. Even Ruby Sky, that's exciting. So if you had something for Victoria, you need to unlock this first, and then you can turn the Genesis shape into, come on, into dude, I don't know why it's not doing it. Technically, if you were to, why is this locked? I don't really know why it does that. Usually you just dial this up and then this body turns into Victoria 4, and then you can go and infer this to Genesis, and then you'd have to go and infer that shape over to Genesis 9. But that there's a lot of work involved to get that right. So I must remind you of point 1 of my initial presentation. If you can avoid converting clothing, avoid it. So go into this with the mindset that it's probably not going to work. And yes, it can be done, but it'll be a ton of work. So always remember, when you go into this whole conversion process, is it worth your time? And I'm saying this specifically if you want to tell a story and you have 2 hours of time to, put a picture together. Is it worth your time converting that leather jacket from one figure generation to another and perhaps risking not coming up with a perfect result? Or do you just want to say, do you know what, different leather jacket or different character, and, do it that way? So sometimes you have to make these creative decisions because they save you time and sanity. So this is a classic example of something I wouldn't recommend. I wouldn't recommend you go and take the Victoria 4 jacket, put it onto Genesis, then export that and put the Genesis jacket onto Genesis 9. I wouldn't do it. Reeby, the hidden Daz character. Yes, it could well be that I need a product to enable these. That could be why these are grayed out. I thought I had it working at one point, but I guess I don't. Yeah, but we have in the Genesis 9 figure, we have all these shapes, but not Victoria 4 by default. So that's if you do want to convert something, even going back to all the way to Genesis 1, you can do it. The only thing you may have to adjust, like this is the original Genesis figure, very cool. The only thing that it doesn't do is the A pose to the T pose, and there's a small discrepancy in the way the legs are set up. So you have to go and match that when you go and bring that in. But this is how you can do this totally manual. So let's recap. Number 1, then, you sanity lost years ago, you say, Barry. Okay. So number 1, then, avoid converting clothing at all. In fact, anything that's made for a different target application than you're trying to use it for, try to not do that. Daz content in Unreal Engine, Daz content in Blender, Quixel content in Daz Studio, try to not do that. Try to find something that's natively made for the target application. Try to find a jacket for the Genesis figure that you're using. If not, try to convert the character into the clothing item that you have. That's a possibility. So if you have a Genesis 9 jacket and you want to put it onto a Genesis 8 character, perhaps convert the Genesis 8 character into a Genesis 9 character. Possibility. Try not to do it. Number 2, try AutoFit and see how that fares. If that doesn't work, try the Riversoft Sickle Yield clothing converter. That converts you the items that you select and also gives you these handy little icons here. Where was that? No, that's not it. Oh yeah, it has mapped it, of course, because Daz Studio had crashed. We had this converted clothing is now here. It gives you these converted icons per product, and is also apparently smart content capable, but it's not a perfect solution. None of the one-click things are a perfect solution. Then number 4, manual conversion, either completely or with these things as starting points, and then use external tools to smooth out kinks and try to get the best result. Hexagon is a really nice tool for this. Graphical issues aside, under UV and paint, you'll find these really important brushes here. The soften tool to get rid of kinks, then you have the pinch tool to make things sharper should you need that, and the inflate tool to make things bulge out again. Also, just the normal selection tool will let you make funky adjustments on all the clothing items. You make things longer, shorter. You have this wonderful soft selection that you can use to manipulate more than just the vertex. So Blender would call this the proportional editing. Don't exactly know why I can't select things here, but hey, I've shown it to you earlier. So that's a nice tool. If you do have ZBrush, that's a beautiful tool to get this done. It's also nicely integrated. If you don't have ZBrush, you can look into Blender. Blender has the same super cool brush features. It's just not as elegantly integrated. into Daz Studio. If you do want to work with Blender, look into a tool called the OBJ Companion. It's a Man-Friday tool that makes it, it's not quite a bridge, but it makes it really easy to export multiple items into Blender. You still have to manually load them in Blender, but you can work with them and then export them and then import these morphs that you generate with the OBJ Companion. In fact, this works with any modeler, so if you don't use Blender, this works with anything really. So that's the beauty of that, the OBJ Companion. Thank you, Brian. Exactly. And that is it. Practice a lot. I think that is the only other thing that I can advise. As you were just in that folder, why is the basic female not in the Genesis 2 folder? I've always had search manually during the transfer. I don't know, actually. Good point, Gorminer. I don't know either. Why is the basic female not in the Genesis 2 folder? Is she not? Ay, caramba. I never noticed this. Maybe I have noticed it. No, you're right. She's not here, right? She should be in there. That is a bug that probably should be fixed. It's a good point. Well spotted. She's not in here. What's she called? Genesis 2 base, and under all products, is she here? Under all files, Genesis 2 base. No, you're right. She's not in the smart content, is she? Is she lost and found? No, she's not even. Where is she? That's crazy. Is she in figures at least? You know, next time I speak to somebody, I will totally bring it up. It's been such a long time since I've worked with Genesis 2. Hey, thank you for bringing that to my attention. I really didn't notice. Perhaps nobody else has. I'm totally going to do that. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I really appreciate that. My friends, I'm going to say goodbye and good night. I'll be back probably next month, hopefully from this location. Julia and I, we have to move from where we currently are. So I hope I can, if not from here, I can hopefully stream from the new location if we have found one by then. Keep your fingers crossed. Thank you so much for being here. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments on the YouTube video that you can, of course, watch afterwards as many times as you like. Have a wonderful rest of the weekend, and I will see you hopefully very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.